Data Storytellers. Today, I am here sitting with Rangan Gangavaram from Verizon. And Rangan and I have been having conversations, I think, for the past 2 years, 1.5 years or so. And then we reconnected recently, had some great discussions on what's happening out there today in the field of AI, especially how that affects data and analytics as a function, as a profession. And I just wanted to immortalize some of those insights and share it with the community. So Rangan, first of all, welcome on the show.
No, thank you, Les. Thanks. And I think I distinctly remember our conversations about a year and a half ago, and I was, very keen on some of the partnerships with you, and I'm so glad that this happened right now.
Absolutely. And there's a lot to talk about, and probably there's more to talk about than last year. I think we connected last year before our Nashville session that we had, and that already had some AI themes. But since then, things really accelerated. So Gen AI was the spark that lit everything on fire. And now AI is the talk of the town. And what we're seeing is that all these narratives are floating around in organizations, and it's not easy to figure out what are the best bets and what are the best moves. So first of all, just to kind of cut into one of the hot topics, agentic AI, right? So let's start with a broad question. Agentic AI, do you think it is the real deal? Is that certainly the direction where we're headed? If we look into the future, 5 years from now, are agents all over the place creating all this value and doing work that humans used to? Or is it just kind of a fluke and another trend will take over soon?
Yeah, I think it's a real deal, no doubt about it. And if we think about the reasons why it's a real deal, right? So obviously, if you look at the history of automation, right? So RPA comes to everybody's mind, right? And when RPA was exactly in the transformative phase that agentic AI is today, the questions were very similar in nature, right? Which is, well, what can RPA do? Well, can it scan through documents and find out where should my contract negotiation be focused on? It could, right? Can it parse out things which would take few FTEs for X number of days to decipher what's in a? It could do it, right? So you think about RPA as a tool. It is real. It has added efficiency. It has added productivity to people, and we are at a place where today we can clearly see that without automation, I wouldn't have really thought about how I could have expedited the journey. Agentic AI is on the similar path. Now, what's going to be different, right, is that agentic AI is going to be a plus plus on top of RPA, right? And this is where the ability to reason, right, and ability to take action on behalf of a human, right? And those are areas where we've seen this play out time and again, right? You pick up a phone, you call a customer care, and you say, hey, by the way, there was an incorrect billing, right? And the agent should know that, hey, by the way, a week ago we had some sort of an outage, which impacted 7 million customers in their billing, right? So when I call them, it's not news to them, right? So which basically means that they'll be like, I'm sorry, you had a billing issue. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to revert the bill to your original bill, and I'm going to do that for you, right? Now think about the same scenario play out in the agentic AI, right? It knows exactly that I was part of a billing issue which happened a week ago, right? And now the agent knows exactly what was the billing issue, and it also knows the dollar amount that was impacted. So think about an agent acting on behalf of a call care center supervisor to say, this is a legitimate caller who has a billing dispute. It's a known, right? And I can reason out because we just dropped the bill yesterday and he would have responded to it. And that's the call. So how about taking an action which basically could lead to even a surprise and delight, right? Which says, hey, by the way, I know, are you calling on behalf of a billing dispute that you uncovered yesterday? And if so, we are happy to tell you that we're actually waiving that $7 off of your bill, right? So it's going to reason out, it's going to make decisions, and more often than not, it's going to do it at a pace, at a way that it's faster than what would have happened, right? So That's an example of where we're actually seeing initial success of agentic AI, where we actually look at our calls, look at our call transcripts, understand the velocity and the momentum of the reasons why it's bubbling up. And if we can identify the people who are actually part of that, we can actually take both proactive and preventive actions. And that's a reality today. It's in a POC, and I only see that kind of use cases being exploded over the next couple of years, where you can reduce call volumes, you make better decisions, it's improving the CX, right? And it's also
Mhm.
hitting the problem at its nail, which is, do you know the problem a customer is facing even before they call? And the answer is
Hmm.
yes.
Hmm. And this is like very intimate and painful to me as you talk, because we actually are facing the same issue here with my provider. I'm not going to name in this case, but they have great internet service. We have like fiber here. It's super fast, lightning fast, super reliable, but that was a billing issue, which means that since like November I'm paying twice as much as I should every single month. And the issue is that for me to actually navigate through this, I have to do it personally. So I can't just get one of my guys to do it because I'm the contract holder. And the customer care is unfortunately not really up to par. So they assured me that it's fixed. It's still not fixed. So we paid like hundreds of dollars in addition to what we should have. And the only reason that I'm still with this provider is because I just don't have time to deal with the issue, right? It's very painful. So when the other provider came and knocked on the door, I was a captive audience, right? So yes, I do want to switch just because of that reason. If there was a good agentic AI that could handle this for me in between calls, I can just talk to it and would figure it out. That would immediately, fix the trust that has been broken and would solve the issue, right? So let's just zoom in on this a little bit from like a professional perspective. So, I mean, talk about RPA. So RPA and automation, that was also a hot topic, right? But it feels like that today there's more kind of adrenaline and more FOMO around AI and agentic AI. So why do you think that the hype is stronger than it was with RPA?
Yeah. So I think it's a little bit of a perception issues and how it's being positioned, right? So the word we used in RPA is automation, right? Rapid process automation. And when you look at that acronym, it doesn't have any word that reflects a person, a human, right? But when it comes to agentic AI, we are using the word active agents, right? An agent can be construed as, oh, I am a customer care agent, or I am a retail agent, or I am a network engineering agent who's trying to. So when you think about the perception, there is this word which is agent, which is trying to do things that a human could do, and perceived as, oh, it's going to be a replacing me. How does it know better than me because I've lived and I've done this for 20 years, 30 years, right? So but if we take a step back and understand the process of what an agentic AI versus an RPA would do, right? If you think about RPA, right, it is about automation of repeatable tasks, right? And we know that we have tons of repeatable tasks, and RPA as a system evolved over the last 10-15 years into different phases, right? But when you think about the multiplier effect, right, the multiplier effect is different between an RPA versus an agent, because when you think about agents, you can almost think about all the aspects of what a human would do versus not. And while some of it is predictable and repeatable, that's where an RPA steps in. And we spoke about the billing issue before, right? And think about exactly when a billing issue happened. It doesn't impact just 1%, right? It impacts 500,000 customers, 1 million customers. And the velocity of the incident means you cannot have 500,000 humans sitting there to answer these calls and take effect. Same thing with a network outage, right? When a network outage happens because of a hurricane, etc., you need that multiplier effect where there are thousands of agents that are able to talk on your behalf and do that in the same time. Whereas a rapid automation means it's a repeatable task which can be foreseen ahead of time, which basically means that you don't need to think about it as a multiplier effect. And that multiplier effect is where we actually feel the impact of an agentic AI show up. Same thing with a credit check, right? Or a fraud, right? So when a fraud velocity happens, right, you are asking the customer to go through a number of things. Show me your driver's license, record your video, put it on so that I can validate that you're a human, you're not a chatbot, right? So think about the multiplicative effect that it's going to have by having agents versus having humans and people do that. And here the key is compressing of the time rather than, hey, by the way, you could have done it and sent it to me offline and next day I come and approve it. No, it has to happen in real time, right? It has to happen in a short window, and that's where the multiplicative effect. And the most important thing is the reasoning, right? So if you think about a live example again, when I call, the agent would have hundreds of reason codes in front of them. Okay, why is Rangan calling? Is it because of a billing issue? Is it because of a network? Is it because of this? So the aspect of figuring out from those hundreds of reason codes is one of the drivers for a prolongated call, right? Now, if you think about agentic AI, it has the ability to look and parse through the thousands of signals, right?
Mhm.
And when you think about the thousands of signals, the act of reasoning becomes more faster, more accurate. I'm not saying it's 100% accurate, it's more accurate, right? Instead of sifting through hundreds of codes, you're actually sifting through hundreds of codes coming with three or two plausible probabilistic, right? And that's where the agentic AI will compress the time cycles. It will also have that multiplying effect. And more importantly, it can lead to better customer experience because if the first two are true, I don't have to wait for an agent. Number two, I don't have to explain the thousand things that I'm going through, which means you are already on the path of resolution versus on the path of discovery.
So, with this, because I have so many questions, I already wrote down a bunch, but let's just take them one by one. So, when we talk about reasoning, so a lot of people are still questioning whether the AI that we talk about today, LLM based AI, we're not talking about artificial general intelligence, that's a whole other conversation, right? So when in the 80s we spoke about AI, actually in today's language, we meant AGI, which we still don't have. All
Yep.
kinds of barriers to that, including not just technological, but even philosophical, or even, we don't understand how we think. Like our understanding of the human brain and our own processes is actually very,
Yep.
rudimentary. But set that aside, let's just talk about AI as we understand it today, LLMs. So do they really reason? And does this even matter? So, in terms of whether the reasoning that we're talking about is human like reasoning or just is kind of like a functional version of that. What are your thoughts around this?
Yeah, so definitely the models are reasoning, right? And why is that so, and why is it important, right? Now, again, let's say a few years ago versus talking about agentic AI, right? When you think about the catch-all or potential the codes process that I talked about earlier, right? It is not a reasoning, but it's almost like a filtering logic, right? So where a filtering logic would say, hey, because someone is calling at 9 o'clock in the night, right, or 10 o'clock in the night, there is certain logic that's built into systems which would basically then say, hey, okay, this could be the possible reasons. But when you think about RPA, the reasoning aspects is not just about the logic which is fed into the system, right? It is about the hundreds of signals which have to be processed real time, right? And that's where, if you think about the agentic AI importance and the efficacy, it's going to boil down to connected systems, connected data, and ability for your LLMs to learn from that and even think about the unknown unknowns which were not part of it, right? And that's where AI is better, right? So, and that's where, and I think it's an important aspect of talking about the unknown unknowns, because when you think about reasoning, there's two parts to it, right? Trying to understand the reason behind the call or the behind, and then the driver, right? What could have been the reason behind the reason, right? What
Hmm.
drove that, right? So when it comes to the agentic AI, both these aspects are something that the models can tease out today, which is
Hmm.
the driver as well as the outcome. When you have both these, the path to resolution and decision becomes very important. If you don't have both of these, do I know that just by giving them a discount it will solve the problem? Well, I wouldn't know that if I didn't know that there was a billing dispute, right? Or there was a billing issue, right? And so on. So both the driver and the reason behind it is as important as just knowing the fact for why the customer is calling, right? So that's where the aspects about reasoning is very important. And today the models are capable, right? They're capable not because of anything, but because the AI aspect today is much of a data aspect, right? So if the data allows the models to learn and understand the reasons and the drivers, then your decisioning will be sound, right? And the classic example would be, if I'm a genuine customer and I'm trying to get a device on Verizon, and I could be called a fraudster. Simple, right? Um, I wouldn't like that fact that I'm called a fraudster, right? Now, think about in the real world today, fraud is a case, and agentic AI is one of the tools that is going to be helping on fraud. Now, for that to happen and manage the user experience, it is not important to call out that I'm a fraud. It's more important to call out the aspects that are driving that to be a fraud, right? Which could be many number of things, right? And so that's where the reasoning is as important, but more importantly it is the drivers and connecting the dots and putting that into a perspective where the decision making process becomes very important.
Hmm. I love that. And this actually explains why the traditional chatbot experience that we've had over the past couple of years is so frustrating. Everyone hates talking to a chatbot, right?
Correct.
A chatbot almost like never gives you what you expect. Hey, is this article useful? Right? You
Yeah.
always just find yourself smashing the get me to an agent button, right?
Correct.
And
Correct.
and with agentic AI, this is kind of flipped. And this is fascinating. I've heard about this before, but you made a really clear you did a really clear explanation of this, of the driver is where it's really at, like
Yep.
understanding what the driver in, if you want to find the solution. So this
Correct.
is great. Now with this, so let's talk about some of the risks and pitfalls with agentic AI, right? So if you are an enterprise leader, you want to go all in on agentic, like a lot of our members are doing that, right? So even our upcoming masterclass, we will look at this whole question of agentic AI from a strategy point of view, from a data foundations point of view, from a communication and deployment point of view. But what do you see as the key risks and pitfalls of deploying agentic AI today?
Yeah. So I think uh, it's a deeper question because we're living through it, right? Which means we don't have a Harvard business case study yet in front of us, right?
We're working
So
on it. Yeah.
we're working on it. So it is something that I think we've all been thinking about. But I think the it's in my mind, the decision matrix, if you will, right? If we have to think about, decision matrix of, okay, what use cases or how do we go about doing it, etc. Right? The first thing is, obviously, for an enterprise, they're super worried about anything that they call AI or agentic AI. They're super worried about value creation, right? Which is, it's not for the sake of doing it, but I should see value, right? So the first important aspect is identifying use cases which has the scope and the potential for value creation. And that scope and potential for value creation should not be a simple multiplier, right? It should be a force multiplier, right? Which basically, the reason why that is important is simple, right? If you think about the life cycle of a transformation and the life cycle of how we can show value, right? While the POCs might say, yeah, it's successful, by the time you roll out and scale out, we're already outdated on that POC, right? So the value creation and the business case falls flat, and it's like half the value, one third the value, and so on, right?
Hmm.
So when you think about the multiplier effect, the use case should have tangible multiplier effect, which can really be the use case that you want to go behind, right? So that's the first. The second thing is, when we think about enterprise, obviously today they're grappling with, when we hear the word AI, there is everything from efficiency, productivity to innovation, right?
Hmm.
Can we unlock innovation, and innovation could be new products, new revenues, new streams, etc. And efficiency and productivity is okay, it's not a new thing, but let's do things what you're doing in a much more efficient and productive way, right? It's important to think about a decision matrix where, are we consciously going after new, or are we going after use cases where it's either in the pipeline of being tested across the industry, or we have some good momentum going on and practices that are evolving. It might not see the full life cycle, but we have the proof of signals, right? That this can potentially work. And that's a very important aspect, because like any other transformation, putting points on board is as important, and putting points on board sooner is more important, right? Which
Hmm.
means, yes, I could work on a true innovation, it could take 5 years, but it could never see the light of it because people get restless, right? And
Hmm.
leadership gets restless. So we are definitely grappling on, hey, when we go back in time and look at where is the success that we had, whether it's on AI, whether it's on a couple of use cases that we call it as transformation, those would be the immediate areas where you should see that multiplier effect as well, right? Because the chain of thought and the curve that you want to see are potentially the same use cases, right?
Hmm.
Like the call center example that I gave, right? Or even the credit checks, the fraud checks examples we gave. Because remember, it used to be a rule based engine for credit checks. It transformed into a statistical model. Then it transformed into a machine learning platform for decisioning. Now it's becoming agentic, right? So
Hmm.
if you think about it, so those use cases of how do we identify things which were successful from a transformation perspective, but still have a lot of examples or a lot of leverage to drive that value creation, right? And that would be the second. The third, in my mind, is identifying the right stakeholder. Operations, right? Right now, we're talking about things like call center, credit, fraud. They're operations, right? Operations is a very, very human centric today, right? In a lot of businesses, but it's also a high touch from a customer standpoint, meaning the cost of making a wrong decision or not having adequate agents or resources to solve the problem can have a multiplying effect. It could mean loss in sales, it could mean bad customer experience, etc., right? So when we think about the use cases and the risks and the pitfalls, it's very important that the process of driving that use case should be in tandem with the stakeholder, right? We're always very eager to say, okay, this is how you should do it, or this is how I would want to help, versus, no, solve the immediate pain point that I have before you touch things that you think are more important, right? And that aspect of bringing the right stakeholder and having that stakeholder rally behind the solution is more important. And if it means that we don't go after the big fish, that's okay, right? If we go after the medium or the low, that's okay. It's important to prove out the success of this. And the reason it's important is, the multiplier effect, right? One stakeholder in a board meeting will draw another stakeholder into the fold, right? We've seen that in our business where we have different business groups. And let's say we are the first to do something for one business group, and the CEO of the business group joins the board and they say, hey, by the way, we are doing this and we've seen value. Immediately, the other business groups are like, when can I get that, right?
Hmm.
So I think that is very important, that without a stakeholder, anytime you do a transformation and an R&D exercise of this nature, you're going to fall flat. And the reason is because it touches people, it touches risk, it touches the cost of doing things incorrectly. And so we have to identify the right stakeholder. um, and then the last but not the least, um, we have to really think about the human element here, right? Which is, I don't think there is anybody out there who's going to come and say, okay, I don't like AI, or I don't see the benefits and so on. I mean, people use iPhones today. Everybody uses 80%. The smartphone penetration is near 100%, which means everybody's using AI, whether they say it or not, right? So I don't think it's about that, right? So, from a company perspective, one of the essential traits that's coming up for leadership is how soon and how deep are you planting the seed in
Hmm.
order for you to see the transformation effect, right? Which means, are you taking the entire organization and the enterprise along in your journey? Or are you doing it on the backwards, which is, oh, I identified a use case, I'm going to roll it out. It may impact people, it may not, right? And then it's a catch up for the employees, right? So we are seeing that, especially when it comes to things like Gemini, Gen AI, and the democratization of tools, um, the rapid rollout of some solutions is actually helping people get their hands on very quickly,
Hmm.
even though they're using it like PlayStation analytics. That's okay, right? It's important to let them do that, because you're now planting the seed for more transformation to come 6, 8, 12, 24 months down the lane, right? So if we don't plant the seed for something that's going to happen 1, 2 years down the lane, we're going to have a lot of change transformation problems. We're going to have a lot of not bought into the strategy, right? One of the uh, feedback we get in our sort of surveys and pulse kind of check is, well, you guys have a lot of tools and things that you're rolling out, but we're not seeing that come through as a rollout strategy. What is your AI strategy? What is your people strategy behind the AI strategy, right? So when we think about that, the pitfall should be, how do we think about it as a holistic strategy, rather than, okay, it's either a platform or a tool or a use case strategy. I think that's where I think we're going to fall short.
Hmm. It's huge. And, this whole AI strategy conversation is so loaded today because everyone is coming with their, the consultants coming with their AI strategy. But there are a few AI strategies that have been, conceptualized, rolled out, and then they are actually yielding results today. It's happening, right? It's happening all across businesses. Again, in the upcoming masterclass that we'll have, we'll look at concrete examples of that too. But it's just tough to figure out because, as you said, there's no precedent to that we can actually look at as a gospel type of use case. Now, with this, so I wrote down a bunch of questions. So just one here with the stakeholder engagement. So this sounds like very much like in the grand scheme of things, when you are rolling out things and you generate value through one stakeholder and then that stakeholder kind of passes on the word. That's the most effective way that we found over the years of how to get your solutions adopted, right? In fact, we do have a framework around user-centered design. One of our advisory board members, Dave Coughlin, we also talked about this on the podcast, so the listeners know. And this is one of our most popular kind of playbooks that are being deployed inside organizations on how to teach the teams to engage in user-centered design. It's a whole process when you actually build something with your stakeholder. Now, with the adoption, though, I see a slight difference between how when we talked about data-driven transformation and analytics and how that was viewed of, okay, we're going to get the organization to implement and start working in data-driven ways. I see a difference between AI and that, because with AI, everyone is getting their hands on it, right? So one
Yep.
of the reasons why it blew up is because it's so inviting to adopt it. Think
Yep.
about ChatGPT, right? So
Yep.
even my less tech savvy friends, or even my wife, she's not really the one to adopt new technologies right away, but with a little bit of nudge, as she's using ChatGPT in a very intuitive way, her own way of how she finds it useful. I use it, and I use Claude and ChatGPT in my intuitive ways. It's already part of my workflow without anyone holding my hand through it, without
Yep.
watching one training video, is just not needed. So
Yep.
the generative AI technology itself of large language models generating output, it just has something about it that's very alluring, right? So now I see an advantage. This is one of the reasons why I think there's a huge reason to be bullish about AI, is because the adoption is very steep. People are adopting it at
Correct.
scale. With data and analytics, it was more about, okay, if we want people to look at analytics or use data to make decisions, well, that's a robust education that you need to deploy. And whether it will work or not, well, that depends on tons of different factors. So with this, so what do you think about even the timeline? So you said the timelines, that now it's even more important than before, that whatever you deploy gets immediate, it has immediate impact, it creates immediate value. With the data driven transformation, I think that was the big pitfall, right? That we've seen functions work on something for 2-3 years with sometimes millions of dollars, only for that solution gather dust in the corner and never. I've seen careers break over that,
Yep.
right? It was that bad. This is almost like a silver lining, that you need to show up with the value so early. Everything is so fast paced, but I think it will also kind of eliminate a lot of dead ends very early on, right? So how do you see that difference between the data driven transformation that we talked about? This is also a question that I discussed on the previous podcast with Elena from TE Connectivity, because she worked for, she was a group chief data officer at Danone, and C-level analytics positions at like Nestle and Johnson, and now with TE Connectivity. And she actually said that this AI transformation looks a lot more like the digital transformation that we talked about than the data transformation, right? What do you think about that?
No, I think that was a very good analogy she had, and I think a lot of ways, my perception is also exactly the same, which is a lot of people are relating this to, okay, the digital age, the internet, right, the .com, etc., right, and I think it's true, right, because the reason it's true is, when we think about the transformation that's in front of us or ahead of us, um, the impact that this transformation is going to have is that multitude effect, right? That the digital is going to have. So what does it mean, right? So if we think about the data transformation, right? Data transformation happens in layers and layers and layers, right? It could be within one system, right? Where you're trying to transform the data, and then you look at multiple systems, you transform it, and then you bring that all together, etc., right? So when you think about the AI transformation, the prerequisite is that your data transformation is already there, or it's happening as we speak, right? If not, you cannot talk about it as an AI transformation, right? Which basically means the unlock will actually come from the benefits of the data transformation, which is basically shining the light and unlocking value, which data silos or lack of data transformation is not. Right.
Hmm.
And that's where it's a fundamental difference, which is again in the digital world, you're able to basically connect a brick and mortar with a virtual asset. Right. And that's where the unlock came in. Right. Now I can have a round the clock shop. It's digital and retail. Right. So that unlock happens when you connect the silos, and then it turns into a multiplier effect. So that's where I think that the analogy is super, from a digital transformation to an AI transformation, because the effect is exactly the same, because you're providing an unlock which was not possible yesterday.
Hmm. And yeah, that's a great point. That AI transformation is now driving this data transformation forward. It's almost like it's been kind of stalling out. Everyone was talking about, okay, if you looked at the Gartner research and the McKinsey papers, like CEOs are making their bets on data, that will be the most important thing. But it was still, of course, it was progressing, right? But not at the pace that we're seeing it now, because now it became really clear that, hey, here's the potential win that we could have. Here's this multiplier effect now, literally an arm's reach away. But we got to sort out our data. So
Yep.
now it becomes not just sort out the data because data is important in general. And yeah, everyone agrees data is important, but no, no, no. We can actually deploy agentic AI. We just need to kind of sort out this piece. So I find it fascinating from like a bird's eye view of how these different transformation narratives affect each other, right?
Yep.
When you said earlier on that now we can have thousands of interactions between, let's say, customers and agents happening at the same time, and all are taking place on through deep reasoning and all that. So what would you say to the concerns that, well, this is very energy demanding and thus costly? So if you're using some external provider who are, let's say, today giving you some sort of service at a certain price, they are usually operating at a loss, right, in anticipation of a future business model, so that there's a risk that your costs will go up. And then if you want to build it in house, then it will be expensive to begin with. Like, what do you think about that concern?
Yeah, I think it is a valid concern. It's a concern that keeps a lot of the CDIOs awake, and I think that um, so we are in a place and time where, if you just think about cost of doing business and pricing, right? The equation is being turned upside down, right? What do I mean by that, right? So today, okay, I have a cost of goods, and then I have some operating costs, some labor costs, and then I'm stuck with, okay, I need to get at least 10% margin. So my price is going to be whatever it costs plus the 10%, right? But the problem there is the customer may or may not be willing to pay the price, right? And what happens is, if you think about from the reverse side, which is in a day and age where we have to meet the customer in terms of where they want to play and what they want to price it at, then the question becomes is, what should be the cost at which I need to serve that customer, right? And that's where the cost of AI will be, right? Because AI is, at least in a lot of enterprises that I'm seeing today, AI's number one objective is to drive operational leverage, which is for the same dollar of revenue that they're generating, how can we cut down the cost, right? So that's where I think we have to be very careful about, and I think to your point about, is it an in-house, it is an external vendor, what about the cost, right? And that's where it's not much about putting laying your eggs in 10 different baskets. And that's where it goes back to the, I think, my point number one, which was, look, we have to find that use case where you really have a long road for achieving a value creation in that cost to serve, right? If it's not, then it becomes a fancy POC, where it's not for the business case, it's not for the value, it's just for the the sake of testing it out, right? It's not going to generate value because you know that the cost to serve is already low and you're putting it there for nothing, right? So that's where I think these both are interconnected, and I think that's where you will see that most of the CDAOs are going to focus their energies on exactly that cost to serve. Where is that cost to serve which has room to actually shrink? If there is not much room to shrink, they're going to question that, right? And they're going to question those use cases, and then it also then determines, in-house versus external and all of
Hmm.
that, right? So that's my 2 cents on that.
Hmm. So this is fascinating because I mean we hit 40 minutes and this was like the intro
Yeah,
basically.
that's
So that was like
great.
a great conversation around that. So let's move to, because I always love to kind of explore the background of professionals who have been in data and analytics, and also what we can learn from some of those first principles today. If you want to build a career in AI, then the only place where you can look is the past, and we did not have that. So you have a really interesting career. How did you even get into data and analytics? Like, what was your core reasoning there?
Yeah, so I'm sure you would have heard this from a lot of people. I think sometimes the confluence of the environment and the paths that emerge, right? And it's not me choosing a path and a path chooses you, kind of thing, right? So I'm an engineer by background, and when I came to the U.S. for my master's. I was actually doing scientific research in the labs. So I was running experiments on how do we mitigate pollutants from air pollution, right? How do you control and so on. So that's exactly the point where I had to do two things. Number one, we had to design, mathematical models for reactors, where I would basically then conduct experiments. And if the experiment is successful, that means it can potentially be scaled in an industry, right? That's the thing, right? So in this, there were two things that were very important. Number one, mathematical models, right? How do we build mathematical models and put it into a test in a lab and then scale it up? The second thing is research methods and statistics, right? So obviously, from scaling up from a lab to an industry, 100 things can go wrong, right? And what is important is the governance around how do you conduct the research, the parameters, etc. And more importantly, when you scale, are you caring for all the statistical noise around it, right? These both were not something that I had studied in engineering. So as part of my master's, I was really focused on taking courses and focused on really the research methods and the statistical analysis and statistical modeling, which was more meant for me to get better at what I'm doing, which is designing an experiment to run in a lab and scale it up. So it was not the path that I chose, which is, oh, I'm a modeler. No, I wouldn't call myself a modeler, right? So that was really my first inclination towards data, meaning a hypothesis, a question, and backing up a question with data and generating data, which means running an experiment, designing that experiment, and then, okay, is it successful? Is it not? Okay, if it's successful, how can I scale it up? Right? And that aspect of that feedback cycle, which I spent, was not something that I had contemplated was how I would take it into my career, right? So that was something which was really refreshing for me. Although I didn't, look at it that way at that point. I was like, oh, statistics, I have to take it because I have to take it, right? So that's really the first foray. The second step that happened after that was really what changed my paths. I was, like I said, I was doing research, and my foray was, okay, let me apply to the EPAs, right, the National Research Laboratory, so that I can continue my research. My immigration problem meant that I was going to run into challenges. So and exactly at that point of time, there were two industries that were really cutting edge on data and analytics: pharma, banking.
Yeah.
And they did not care much about your background. They cared more about your ability to apply quantitative techniques and modeling in a domain like pharma or banking. So I actually went through an interview process with these companies because they were looking for, okay, if you're a good quant, if you understand analytics, if you can do that, and if you can crack our interview, here's your path, right? So that's how I got into banking, because they focused more on the quant side, ability to build things quickly, solve numbers, right? And that's where I entered in. And thankfully, right, the process of what I was applying these techniques was similar in nature of what I was studying as, in my research methods, right? Which is, okay, we have a customer pricing problem. Well, do we know what customers like and they don't like? Is it the price? Is it the product? How do you conduct experiments? So I was in the marketing analytics team, right? Running champion challengers, testing A/B testing, right? And okay, lower price, higher price, what kind of. So if you think about the connecting of the dots, the aspects of data and analytics was becoming more about what are you applying it in, rather than, oh, I'm an engineer, I'm a farmer, or I'm a banker. It was not much about that, right? So that aspect of applicability to any industry was very fascinating to me then, because when I left my roots, which is, okay, I'm a researcher, I'm an engineer, and I'm picking up new roots, which is, okay, I'm an analyst, right? Why should I restrict myself to an industry, right? So that aspect was very important, and that's where I think it was no turning back. I worked in the banking. I'm in the telco business today, and hopefully it'll lead me to new paths. And I think that's basically what I would call as the new identity of people in the AI space, which is, you can put any identity you want to, because where you come from is less important. Where you're headed towards is actually more important. So that's where I think AI actually demystifies your identity and
Hmm.
say, are you ready to solve problems, real problems? Then here is the path for you, right? And that's what actually really fascinated me.
Hmm. Absolutely. And then, I mean, you've been around the block. You work for companies like JP Morgan and Barclaycard, not Verizon. So, I mean, we are the data storytellers. Obviously, we are fascinated by stories and also the importance of storytelling in these fields, where it's not just about the technical prowess, which is super important, right?
Yep.
That you know what you're doing, sometimes not even about the business value that you create, which again is pivotal, but also, can you conceptualize this and communicate this in a way that resonates with people across the board, different stakeholders inside the company, or even sometimes we see, especially nowadays, some of our 100-year-old clients, um, household names who want to position themselves as not only the go-to brand in a particular area, but also as front runners in innovation, as companies that leverage data-driven technologies, digital transformation, and AI in elegant, skillful, thoughtful, smart, ethical ways. And this is a difficult message to convey, because we're talking about complicated concepts and technology. So how did you see the role of storytelling over your career, and the importance of being able to convey a message and tell a story to engage individuals even outside of the realm of data and analytics and AI?
Yeah, I think it is one of the most crucial aspect of the success of my path, actually. Um, so when again, going back to my path, so when I joined my first analyst kind of role, right? um, I was actually not a native, storyteller. No, because my job was, designing, experiments. I wrote, few journal articles, scientific journals, and you know how those are. They're like, there's an abstract, and there's a research, and there's a methodology, and there's findings, right? And that means you're talking for, either a scientist to a scientist, or a researcher to a researcher, right? But then in a real life setting, it's not that way, right? You're not talking from a researcher to a researcher. You're not talking from a scientist to a scientist, or an engineer to an engineer, right? You're actually talking with all the facets and functions that successfully drives a business outcome, right? And this is where the aspect of using a common language, which is going to be important. And that's where the concept of storytelling is, which is, it's not much about a Spielberg story, right? It's much about how do you weave the narrative, which can actually get multiple personas hooked up to the concept or the outcome, so that they can rally behind it, right? And that's the aspect of storytelling, right? And I sucked in my first 1 year because I was not, like I said, right? But my manager actually made me go through this course. You may know this. It's actually by Edward Tufte,
Oh yeah,
who's a Princeton.
Tufty.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
and believe it or not, there was one single course that really changed my perception of data representation. Just how do you tell intelligent visualizations, right? And use really simple, techniques, but in a powerful way. And it was a day long workshop, but I was just purely blown out, right? Because it told me, you know whatever I was doing for the first 1 year is like, okay, dude, you need to take a step back and rethink now with this toolkits that you've learned. And that taught me a lot about my success, right? Which is, in order for me to resonate, right, it is very important that you put your background behind you and focus more about who you're talking to and the people in the room, right? And if I don't do that, you could be very good at what you're doing, there's no harm to it, right? But the success is going to be defined by how much you can penetrate into the room, right?
Mhm.
And that course, I would say, single-handedly changed my life.
Hmm. It's funny because, yeah, I mean, you can have all that skill, and it's great to be, and it's very important and crucial and pivotal and essential to be good at what you do, right? But if you can't tell that story, you're kind of a light under a bushel, right? So you can't have that. And it's fun that you mentioned Tufty because actually in our advanced business communications series that we did with Dave Coughlin, I think there are like 16 episodes if someone wants to scroll down in our podcast feed. One of those, I think maybe even two of those, are about Tufty,
Ah,
specifically kind of dissecting a lot of those storytelling techniques and mapping them onto, okay, how do you tell stories
yeah,
through slides specifically.
yeah.
So this is awesome. And look, I mean, I think we could continue this conversation there. We just spent 40 minutes on the intro, I think, but this was also like great career advice. What would be your, just as maybe as closing remarks, and hopefully we can do another round at some point of this, but what would be your key advice to aspiring professionals in the data analytics and AI and innovation space today? What to focus on? What would be your 2 cents?
I think that if someone wants to be successful in the data and analytics space, I think that first of all, losing our identity is very important. And when I say losing the identity, it doesn't matter what background you come from. Could be a functional specialist, you could be an engineer, you could be a scientist, you could be whatever. You could all enter into the data analytics path. It's very important to master the domain that you're going into, right? The domain is the place where rubber meets the road, your skills meets business value. And the first 6, 9, 12 months of whenever I join a job or take up a path and so on is all about learning that business, right? All about learning that business domain. It could be same business that you move from one team to another team, right? Learn the domain. Without domain knowledge and without marrying the technical aspects with the domain knowledge, we are not going to see our success come through as value realization. So I think that people talk about business acumen, right, as a very important thing. I find that that is the most important thing, because for people who are in this field, by design, they must have learned Python, they must have learned, ML, they must have learned all of these things. But what they have not yet proven is the application of that in the area that you are going to demonstrate and extracting value, right? So that path is going to be the most important, which is application and learning the business aspect, the domain knowledge, and doing that. Once you do that, it's a rinse and repeat everywhere you go. I change the domain tomorrow. Tomorrow I could join a pharma. It's the same process, right? So be very curious exactly about your domain. If you don't ask and if you're not curious about the domain, guess what? AI is going to be better than us anyways, right? But you will not be in a place where you can reshape how AI should operate and where it should operate.
Mhm. And this is exactly what we found in over these. I mean, I've been, watching these big Fortune 500 digital and data and now AI transformations, and those are the three pillars. Actually, the domain knowledge, super important. Everything is built on that. But then, without business acumen, not much of that will be activated. And without the third pillar, storytelling and communication, the word won't spread. So
Correct.
this is a fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed it, Rangan, and we look forward to continuing our collaboration with you. There's a lot ahead, and we hope to have you back on the show. This was great.
No, I think this was a very refreshing conversation because in some ways it's also intriguing and it's also picking my brain, right? And but it's also good to hear from you on what you are hearing from other people because you have a unique perspective, having spoken to a multitude of people from different industries. So as you were asking, I could see the reasons why you were asking because your brain is exploding with the conversations that you're having and you're circling the dots and you're like okay, I'm getting a different answer here. So it's very interesting, from that perspective. So thank you for educating me on some of the things that you are doing. It's very refreshing, and I'm so happy that this partnership has happened.
Absolutely, and 100%. Even that article that I wrote, I think it kind of. I still need to share that out. I think this is one of my. It's on my to do list on the Blackboard to share out that article that one of our advisory board members, Elon Kazi, already did, and people are coming to me. Oh, that's so cool to hear from 100 plus executives leading data transformation and what you found. And yes, even my notepad, as we're going through these conversations, are exploding with these insights. That's why these discussions are exhilarating, right? Because I can get your perspective and then we can connect the dots together. So this is what the data storytellers community is about. We appreciate you and we look forward to the next session.
Cool. Thank you, Laz. Cheers.